Welcome to the SAFO Heinz Stefan Fellowship Award presentation and distinguished lecture. My name is Xiating Chen. I'm the director of Xiating Chen Laboratory. Yeah. And today I'm very honored to first introduce our Heinz Stefan Fellowship award winner this year, and we will have a short program showing award winner Xiating's work about that, and then followed by our tradition of have a external distinguished researcher giving us a research presentation. So let me first say a few words about Professor Heinz Stefan. And he's joining us online today. Hi, Heinz. And Professor Stefan came to Xiating Chen Laboratory in 1963 as a postdoc. And previously he was in Europe, in Germany. So he came here to work with Professor Alvin Anderson, and one of the SAFO previous directors. And Professor Stefan is one of the very few people now who actually met founding director of SAFO, Dr. Lorenzo Straub. So after his postdoc work at SAFO, then he went back to Europe and to work there as engineer and in academia for a short period. And then in 1967, he came back to University of Minnesota to start his faculty career here. So he worked here for almost 45 years till his retirement. Yeah. And in his long and successful career, he has made fundamental contributions to the research in hydraulics. Yeah. And he has written more than 200 journal papers, and he has supervised more than 100 graduate students. Okay. And he edited 4 books. And after his retirement, he continued to be here, and probably for many of you in the lab know, well, usually on Wednesdays, he would have lunch in our Straub library. Yeah, so it's really a great pleasure. Yeah, okay. So his influence in the lab is long and lasting. And today here, I already saw a number of his former students sitting here. Yeah, okay. Well, without much ado, let's go to this fellowship. This fellowship was established by the donation of Damermathan family, and to honor the accomplishment of Professor Heinz Stefan. Okay. And each year we select one student from SAFO whose research area is in the water resources with a focus on ecological hydraulics for that. And this year, our student winner is Xiating Chen. And next, I'm going to invite Xiating's advisor, Professor Stefan, to say a few words about Xiating.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Xiating. She graduated from Duke University in 2017 with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering, doing research on mercury bioavailability and like plant uptake of nanoparticles, and so in a different arena. And then after graduation, she worked for a couple of years as a water and wastewater engineer in North Carolina. And ever since coming to University of Minnesota, her research has been focused on looking at the interface between green and gray infrastructure in urban areas. So her work has been really pivotal to our long-term ecological research program in Minneapolis and St. Paul, where she has yet again picked up a new set of skills in building and deploying sensors, compact and kind of cost-effective sensor that can be deployed around the Twin Cities areas to study the impact of urban trees on stormwater and on the urban heat island effect, which I think she'll talk about in the presentation. But on a personal level, I'm also really appreciate Xiating's enthusiastic community ability to kind of build a community and bring people together, both for fun and also for projects. which I know that many of us at SAFL has benefited from. So it's my pleasure to introduce Xiating, and then I'll hand over the mic.
Well, thanks everyone. First of all, thank you for the really nice introduction, Shrey. I'm also happy to be here, and thank you for the awards committee for this opportunity and this funding opportunity. And last of all, thank you for the Heinz Stefan Fellowship and everyone who has contributed to different various numbers of funds in SAFL. Your generosity means a lot to the students here. And I see a lot of new faces. Why are you not showing up to happy hour? That's what my question for all the students sitting here. So next time, make sure you come by. So today I'm going to focus on one small section of my dissertation research, talking about trees as urban heat and water regulators. So as Shrey mentioned, my interest mostly, I'm mostly focusing on green and gray infrastructure. Green meaning something that we see like this rain garden on the right side of the screen, something has vegetation and soil that takes up water. Gray meaning things that we use like roads and pipe networks, they quickly transport water within the urban landscape. So for green infrastructure, a lot of people think about these rain gardens as the typical green infrastructure, but what I'm interested in also expand to trees and parks. So this is a picture of Lake Hiawatha near where I live. Trees as green infrastructure is kind of not a novel idea, but what exactly are they doing? They can store water in the tree canopy layer. They promote infiltration and also allow evapotranspiration. And by doing all of that, they can reduce the stormwater runoff going into our stream. So we can reduce flooding and see lower peak flow in the lakes and rivers. But it's actually not very easy to talk about them as green infrastructure for us engineers, because we don't have a good way to quantify how much stormwater reduction they actually provide. We look at trees and think about them in different species, but as a species level, their differences also contribute to their effectiveness as solution to stormwater runoff reduction. And then when we go to the watershed level, thinking about all these different green infrastructure working together to control our hydrologic urban hydrology, it's also not as simple as individually adding all of them up together. Their cumulative effects is usually nonlinear, and with the site variability, it is hard to figure out what is the actual outcome at the watershed level. And last of all, we're only beginning to see different people coming together doing a watershed level design of green infrastructure. But to tackle this in my research, if I can get the mouse to work. Okay, so I mainly focus on the interaction between green infrastructure and urban hydrology at 3 levels. So at the level of urban trees, the question we're trying to answer is, what is the extent of urban canopies benefits to microclimate and stormwater? At the slightly larger level of stormwater catchments, so you can think about this as a neighborhood block or a city level. Where do we incorporate green infrastructure into existing gray infrastructure network? So this work, we generated a bunch of synthetic stormwater networks with different flow paths and placed green infrastructure kind of all over different places in the network, and then ran stormwater models under different rainfall scenarios. So going from something like a 2-year storm to a 100-year storm, we're looking at the peak flow and flooding outcome. And this work has been submitted to Water Resources Research for review. And lastly, the last part of my dissertation work will look at how we can upscale the effects of urban canopy and land cover changes to the watersheds. And to do this work, I'm planning on using local watershed data from not just Minneapolis and St. Paul, but the greater Twin Cities metropolitan area to look at how stream flow has changed over the past 20, 30 years. So I'm gonna talk about a little bit more about the trees. Here in the National Science Foundation's LTER project, focusing on the urban ecosystem of Minneapolis-St. Paul, we have centralized, we have many decentralized instrumentation on trees in parks in St. Paul. And these are paired measurements with under canopy measurements and open canopy measurement to understand what, for example, in this case, air temperature measurement to look at how canopies are reducing air temperature and relative humidity. And then we are also measuring rainfall amount using tipping buckets and also measuring soil moisture at different depths to gain a better understanding of the soil moisture dynamics distribution with under the tree layers. And then lastly, this is the electronics work that Shrey has mentioned. We have developed and built a lot of these low-cost Saflux sensors. Saflux, think about maple syrup. Saflux is the liquid that actually gets transported inside the tree. And then we use Saflux as a proxy to measure evapotranspiration in trees. So to develop these sensors, we actually did so in Professor Andy Wickert's lab in Tate Hall. This is a graduate student on the project Faith. These are placed into the sapwood of the tree, and they need to be wrapped by radiation, like by insulators, so then they don't get heated up by the sun. And I should also mention that this is a team that actually goes behind the work that I'm presenting today. It's a lot of people, and thank you everyone for what you've done on this project. So to show a little bit about preliminary data from our field season last year, I want to just, if anyone's familiar with the Twin Cities, this is the city of St. Paul. We have chosen 4 parks in different parts of St. Paul. And then these parks are closely related to another stormwater monitoring station nearby. And the data I'll present on is focused in Linwood Recreation Center, which is right here. And this is the tree that I'll be talking about, this tree blocked in red. So our first result shows that the vapor pressure deficit, which is a function of air temperature and relative humidity, and it measures how dry the air is, that drives the tree transpiration, which is how much water that's going through the tree. So in this plot, we have in black the daily sap flux rate. This is how much water that's going through tree every day. In red, we have the mean vapor pressure deficit in the atmosphere. And then in blue, we have the amount of rain that we're seeing that day. You could see that on a very broad level, the sap flux density, the sap flux amount tracks with the vapor pressure deficit, which is how dry the air is. And this is also true if we look at the diurnal scale for some of these time series data. However, sometimes the sap flux actually will peak post-rain despite low vapor pressure deficit, as shown here. So this is just some preliminary data to show that in this site, for example, we didn't have co-located soil moisture measurement in time for this analysis, but that's just show the benefits of having these different sets of co-located data to further demonstrate the soil, plant, and water interaction. And the second result shows that canopy cooling correlates with air temperature. These are going back to the 4 parks in the city of St. Paul, where these are average data from 2 months period of collection over a 24-hour period, or average over 24-hour. And we can see that on the y-axis, it's a temperature reduction under canopy, which means how much hotter it is outside the canopy than it is under the canopy. And one thing that we notice is that when it's hotter, this is typically in the afternoon, when the air temperature is higher, that's closer to the red, we have seen a larger temperature reduction under canopy across 4 sites. But there is site-to-site variation. We can see that with the aerial image of these 4 sites, we can see how different this land cover actually look, even though there are 4 parks in the same city. Some parks have more green colors than others do. And what we're seeing here, especially at Linwood Park, which is the park that has the greatest lawn coverage, can see that there is a slight dip in the middle of the day when we're expecting the temperature to be hottest, but then the temperature reduction is not at the highest. So to check what's going on there, our initial hypothesis was that maybe the trees, because it's too hot and too dry, they stopped transpiration. But then when we look at the actual sap flux data measured at the tree in the site, we noticed that actually trees are still transpiring during that time of the day. But noticing that there are other vegetations around the area which may also contribute to evapotranspiration and evaporative cooling in the area, that's something else for us to check in the future to see if all trees have behaved the same way in response to a higher temperature and higher vapor pressure deficit. So as a wrap up, I would just like to say that in this field season, next coming field season, we're gonna have more co-located urban tree measurements throughout the city of St. Paul. And as a part of my research, I'm also gonna be analyzing how urbanization and green infrastructure practice affected Twin Cities watersheds using data from Metropolitan Council, as well as the Capital Region Watershed District. And lastly, we hope to integrate these works to the bigger long-term ecological research network to look at how urban stressors overall affect Twin Cities ecosystem. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you, everyone. I'll take some questions if you have any.
Anyone from the audience have questions? Yeah, Dr. Chris Ellis.
Without going into tons of detail, what's the premise or what's the idea behind your flux, your SAP measurement? You have 2 probes. How does that give you flux in general?
So we heat up one of the probes, and then so there are thermocouples that sit in these probes. We heat up one of the probes, and then the temperature difference that we measure between the thermocouple ends correspond to a flow rate in the tree. So basically, if there's no flow at all, one end is heated, but there's no convection that's cooling the other, or that's transporting the heat, then you see greater temperature difference when there's no flow. But when there is higher flow, then the temperature gradients evened out. So that's the basic idea.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, okay.
I guess I have a follow-up question on that one. So it looks like you had 2 probes, and does the sap flow up and down? And if so, like how do you alternate which ones you heat to tell which way it's going?
So that's a really good question. SAP mostly goes up. It rarely comes down. In this case, we're just measuring the flow in one direction. However, there are other tools out there to measure SAP flux that capture the reverse flow.
Great. Well, really, congratulations. Very nice work. Okay. And also, okay, as the lab director, I want to thank Xiating for all her great contributions to the community. And as many of you know, Xiating has been serving as the president of St. Paul's Student Council. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. And somehow, looking at her research, I sort of like thinking, well, for a lot of activities, she proposed going outside, going indoor, okay, yeah. Whether or not she was also trying to think about doing research on the side while organizing those activities.
I didn't ask anyone to do field work with me. That's
Great. Yeah. Okay.